If you've already watched part 1 of Research and Citing Sources, you know exactly how to cite sources in a speech. But now let's talk about where to go to get to the sources. Now, the search method that all of you grew up with and the method that is second nature to anyone your age is Google. So let's talk about Google as a research method. Sticking with our example of human trafficking from our last video, I typed this phrase into Google and ended up with 3,690,000 results. Let me put that into perspective. If a person were to spend only 1 minute per result, it would take that person working every minute of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year for just shy of 7 years to work through that kind of information. What if instead you could use the internet, but to get to only places that had only reputable sources and databases, rather than worldwide databases, thereby limiting your search to only usable research? Would you go there? If so, then when you've determined your topic, go to mel.org. That stands for Michigan Electronic Library. Now, you can get to mel.org from home or from school. At home, you may have to enter a driver's license number. It doesn't have to be your own. In the state of Michigan, a driver's license starts with the first letter of your last name, and then it is followed by 12 digits. Once you're in and you see a screen that looks like this, click on full text magazines and newspapers on the left side of the screen to get full text articles that you can print off. Or, better yet, go to Mel Database on the top right side of the screen. Both of these will give you many options of places to search for your topic depending on the type of topic you have. Some that I would recommend for high schoolers would be InfoTrack or Newsbank or Wilson Select, but there's many others depending, like I said, on the type of topic you have that you can search in. But if you must use something from a website that you found or you use a worldwide database, remember these guidelines. Here are some internet do's when researching. First off, make sure that you use school-appropriate sources. If you're, for example, doing your informative speech on something like modern-day hate groups, obviously you're not going to be able to search for that at school because you will be blocked. So make sure that you, if you're doing a topic like that, that is an okay topic, that you do the majority of the research at home and make sure you choose school-appropriate sources. Secondly, make sure that you choose reputable sources. I've used that word a lot. Make sure that the reputation of the publication or website is good. Thirdly, use up-to-date sources. Look at when the information was written and when it was last updated. Fourth, make sure you use scholarly sources. Think about who wrote it. Do they have the expertise to write about the topic, and how do you know that? Lastly, some questions to ask about internet research is whether or not it's a .com, .edu, .org, .net. That's a first starting place of something to look at to determine whether or not a website might be credible. .coms, obviously anybody can publish. .edu is an educational institution. A .net is a network, and .org is an organization. That's kind of a first clue for you. Next, look at what do you know about the company or the organization that is posting the information. Thirdly, who advertises on the website? If you're getting lots of advertisements and pop-ups, somebody's getting paid. And so that might be an indication to you, a preliminary indication that it might not be the most reputable source. Next, do the writers cite sources when relevant? Did they do their research? Now, if you think back to the example that we used in the last video about human trafficking, I was able to get to an original source because the writer cited his sources. So that's really important to look at. Are they citing their sources? That's how you know they are credible. And then, of course, look at when was the information written or when was it last updated. Make sure that it is up to date. Some example websites that might be okay to use are ones that already have built-in credibility. For example, websites that are from a credible organization such as the American Cancer Society. Now, let's say you were doing a speech on the cancer epidemic in America versus cancer statistics from around the world. If you said to your audience, according to the American Cancer Society's website, that's something that they can understand as credible. Some other types of websites that may be okay to cite are things like research centers or fact tanks, government websites or organizations such as NASA or Michigan.gov, or in some cases product-based.coms depending on your topic if you have a very specific topic. For example, years ago my students challenged me to do a speech on the most boring topic they could come up with and try and make it interesting like I was challenging them to do. Well, after convening and narrowing down, they finally came up with the topic of Elmer's glue. So because of the specific nature of the topic that I had to do, I did use elmers.com for some of my research. Now keep in mind, however, that some of these product-based.coms are biased because often they're trying to sell you something. So use good judgment when using this type of research. Some don'ts when it comes to internet research include, number one, don't use encyclopedias. We've graduated past this. Now this includes Wikipedia. Wikipedia, as you may know, anybody can contribute to it. So you don't know always whether or not the information is written by a credible source or whether it's written as a joke. One great thing that you can do with Wikipedia is you can scroll down to the bottom of the screen where they cite their sources, and sometimes that will lead you to an original source that you actually can use. So Wikipedia does have some pluses, but you cannot use it as research. You can only use it as a starting point. Secondly, don't assume that everything on the internet is research. Make sure that you're doing your research to figure out what's credible and what's not. Third, don't assume that you don't have to think while researching. Researching is primarily a thinking process. And fourthly, don't start with Google. Sure, Google is great. I use it all the time, but it is not good research. It is good, however, if you're using Google News, sometimes Google Images, especially if you're putting together a visual aid for a speech. It's also good for getting ideas on different aspects of your topic so that you can then search legitimate databases. Sometimes you might find a word or a phrase or an idea from doing some preliminary research on Google that will help you with searching for information later on. Now, I often tell students that researching is kind of like being a detective or doing a scavenger hunt. With research comes one step, which leads to another, which leads to another. All clues in the process. Not all research, like I said, is as easy as just typing something in. It just doesn't work that way. You have to think. In closing, let me ease the possible anxiety that may have been building during these past two videos. I know that research feels overwhelming, especially since it's not always cut and dry. The internet is certainly a double-edged sword when it comes to research. It's great in some ways, but dangerous in others. But as overwhelming as it may seem right now, let me encourage you that it is much easier than the olden days of research. So, to close, let me take you through a quick journey of research just 10 to 15 years ago when I was in college. In fact, this is how we had to research. Step 1. First, you would go to the library. That's a place with lots of books. Secondly, in the library, you would go to a card catalog and search under your topic. Of course, now card catalogs are electronic. They're on the computer. And back then we had that as well, but you could never get to full text things that you could print out on the computer. You could only be told where to go to find that information. So where would you go? You would go in step 3 into this large room filled with filing cabinets. That's where all the periodicals were housed. So the magazines, the newspapers, all those types of things were in these filing cabinets. But the drawers did not contain the actual magazines, of course. Instead, the magazines were shrunken down into tiny little pictures on overhead type film. This was called microfiche or microfilm. Step 4, you would find the correct address of the drawer that housed the particular microfiche you needed. And step 5, you would then, among all the files, find the actual microfiche that has the picture of your article. How would you see that picture? Well, step 6, you would find a microfiche reader that wasn't being used. Sometimes this would require waiting in a line for a while. There weren't an infinite number of these microfiche readers. Step 7, you would put the microfiche in the reader and you would scroll through the pictures until you found the one you wanted, which was step 8. And finally, 9 steps later, you would print out that article if it was usable. Now, this usually required money. In other words, you were paying for each page of each source that you printed. So consider yourself lucky. Being able to find information in approximately a few minutes in some cases from legitimate research databases on your own computer from the comfort of your own home without having to travel or pay for it, doesn't seem so labor intensive anymore, does it? It just takes a little brain power and some time. Remember, research is nothing more than a glorified scavenger hunt. You just have to be looking in the right places and use your skills of deduction to hone in on clues that you can use. So good luck as you begin your scavenger hunt of research. Growing up in the information age has afforded you many privileges that decades and generations before you did not have. Just be sure to use your brain and your information wisely.